Sometimes the most powerful challenge to a nation's story, to the way it sees itself, doesn't come from its enemies. It comes from a voice inside. That uncomfortable, inconvenient voice of conscience that asks, are we really who we say we are? So to dig into that, we're going to go back 500 years to the dawn of a global empire and to a warning that, well, it still echoes today. Okay, just picture this. The year is 1511. You're a Spanish conquistador on the island of Hispaniola. You're powerful, you're getting rich, and you're absolutely convinced you're on a mission from God. And then, right in the middle of a Christmas sermon, this Dominican friar Antonio de Montesinos gets up and says this. He tells you right to your face that what you're doing has put your eternal soul at risk. I mean, this wasn't just some, criticism. This was a spiritual bombshell. So yeah, that sermon, it totally lit a fuse. And in the crowd of colonists who heard it, or at least heard about it, was one man who would grab that torch and carry it all the way to the King of Spain himself. His name was Bartolomé de las Casas. And here's the thing you've got to understand about Las Casas. He wasn't some outsider from the start. He was part of the very system that he would eventually spend his life fighting against. He came to the Americas as a priest, sure, but he was also a colonist. He owned land, and he was even granted the forced labor of native people. He was one of them, an insider. But this change didn't happen overnight. He got there in 1502. He even took part in the bloody conquest of Cuba. But what he saw there, the raw, unbelievable brutality, it just started to eat at him. So just 2 years after getting his own plot of land and the people to work it, he has this total crisis of conscience. He gives it all up and begins this lifelong crusade to tell the world about the horrors he'd seen. So what was this system he was so fired up about? Well, the official story coming out of Spain was all about glory, God, and gold. But the reality, the day-to-day on the ground, oh, that was something else entirely, built on a system that was basically designed for pure exploitation. It was called the encomienda system. And on paper, you could almost make it sound nice, right? Paternalistic even. The Spanish crown gives a colonist the right to native labor, and in exchange, the colonist is supposed to protect them and teach them about Christianity. But in reality, come on, thousands of miles from any real authority, it was slavery. It was slavery in everything but name. And Las Casas, he did not pull any punches. He described the people he met in the Americas as gentle lambs and the Spanish conquistadors as ravening wolves. This wasn't some dry academic report. This was a gut punch. It was a moral appeal, and it was meant to shock people, to wake up the conscience of a supposedly Christian nation. He was painting this vivid picture of innocence being just devoured by greed. In his most famous book, he actually put a number on it. He estimated that in just the first few decades of the conquest, more than 12 million indigenous people died. Okay, so let's be real. Modern historians look at this number and they debate it a lot. They say it might be an exaggeration, but you have to remember, for Las Casas, this wasn't about getting the exact number for a textbook. It was about showing the sheer, unimaginable scale of the devastation. And this complete imbalance of power led to some absolutely horrific policies. Las Casas wrote about this unofficial rule he saw in action. If the native people, in some act of total desperation, managed to kill one Spaniard, the colonists would retaliate by slaughtering 100 of them. It's just pure terror, right? Designed to crush anyone who even thought about fighting back. The reports from Las Casas were so explosive, so damning, that they forced the entire Spanish Empire to do something that had literally never been done before in history. They hit pause on their conquests to hold a formal, public debate about whether what they were doing was right or wrong. It was called the Valladolid debate, and it was basically a trial for the very soul of the empire. So the whole thing, this massive debate, it all boiled down to one single question. Who were the indigenous people of the Americas? On one side, you had Las Casas arguing they were fully human with souls, reason, and rights. And on the other side, his opponent, a scholar named Sepulveda, actually used Aristotle's philosophy to argue that these people were natural slaves and that conquering them was basically a favor, a just war to civilize them. So on the surface, it looks like Las Casas won. King Charles V was so moved he passed something called the New Laws of 1542, which outlawed native slavery and the entire encomienda system. It was this huge victory, on paper. But, and this is a huge but, the colonists in the Americas who were getting rich off the system, they protested so loudly and so fiercely that the king caved, and the ban was quickly overturned. So the laws got reversed. But did those fundamental questions that Las Casas and Sepulveda were screaming about, did they ever really go away? Or did they just change their clothes? Because really, the same core conflict, the right to land, the justification for conquest, the very humanity of the people being conquered, it just keeps popping up again and again, in different centuries, for different empires. I mean, just look at how this echoes through the centuries. Nearly 350 years after Spain tried to fix things with its new laws, Canada starts its residential school system, which was all about forcibly assimilating Indigenous kids. It took all the way until 2015 for Canada to issue a formal Truth and Reconciliation report. And just in 2023, the Vatican finally, formally, rejected the doctrine of discovery, the 15th century idea that gave European powers the green light in the first place. The debate is still happening. And today, there's actually a modern term for the kinds of arguments used to push back against these uncomfortable truths. It's called historical negationism, and it's basically a fancy term for trying to twist history so that a country can keep feeling good about itself. And the tactics, they're always the same. It's almost like a playbook. First, you just deny the facts. Then, you minimize the harm. You say, oh, it wasn't that bad. Then you try to muddy the waters to create doubt. And sometimes you even flip the whole script and paint the victims as the bad guys and the perpetrators as the ones who were just trying to help. This was Sepulveda's playbook, and it's the exact same one used today. And this is where you can really see that connection right across the centuries. On the left, you have the man who forced his country to look at its own crimes. And on the right, a modern memorial, a quiet and powerful testament to a very similar history and a very similar fight for the truth. At the end of the day, the struggle is exactly the same: to make a nation look at the parts of its past it would much rather ignore. A recent Canadian report on missing Indigenous children just lays it out there, plain and simple. It says the whole point of this denial isn't just to argue about what happened way back when. The goal is to make colonialism feel like it's over, to make it seem like it's a closed chapter, a thing of the past, so that any ongoing claims for rights or land or justice can just be brushed aside. Which, brings us right back to where we started. If these exact same debates are still happening today, then the need for that national conscience, for people willing to speak those difficult, uncomfortable truths, is every bit as urgent as it was back in the 1500s. The core conflict, the basic tension, it's still the same. It's the comforting, heroic myth a nation tells about itself versus the often brutal, complicated, and painful reality of its history. And trying to close that gap, well, that's the work of generations. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission called for something they call an anti-colonial ethics of care. And that's a really powerful idea, isn't it? It suggests that being a good citizen isn't just about celebrating your country's history. It's about being willing to confront the injustices, especially because the echoes of those injustices are still shaping the world we live in right now. And so that leaves us with one final, pretty unavoidable question. 500 years ago, it was a friar who decided to take on an entire empire. So today, in our world of social media and endless noise and deep, deep divisions, who is playing that role? Who's holding up the mirror and asking the tough questions, demanding that a nation actually live up to the ideals it says it believes in?